Hey, everybody. Welcome to Time with the Bible Live. We're going to start doing this every Friday, and we're going to have somebody new each week. And the goal is to just get to know Jesus through the eyewitness accounts, looking at the different stories that we find there and talking about some things that we can learn. And today we actually have Chase Byers with us. I'm really glad to have him with us.
Yeah, it's good to be here today.
Hey, Chase.
Yeah, glad I got to join this way. I'm excited for the series going forward. I think it's a cool focus on the life of Jesus and his different teachings.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I've got several people lined up, and you were one of the ones that I happened to contact first, and I'm really glad you're able to be here. We're going to be in Mark chapter 2. So for everybody who's joining us, we're going to be looking at Jesus on the Sabbath day, and we're going to talk about this story here. So we're in Mark chapter 2, verse 23. That's where it begins. Mark 2, 23. And we're going to just, Chase, would you mind reading that for us?
Yeah, sure. Mark 2:23. And it happened that he was passing through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples began to make their way along while picking the heads of grain. The Pharisees were saying to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was in need, and he and his companions became hungry? How he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest, and ate the consecrated bread, which is not lawful for anyone to eat except the priest. And he also gave it to those who were with him." Jesus said to them, "The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath."
All right, great. Okay, so let's think about this for a little bit and talk about what's going on here in the context of this. Chase, in the context of this, Jesus is really being challenged several times by the Pharisees and by the scribes. And this is another one of those challenges that they threw his way. So they're in the grain fields, plucking.
Right. Yep. And I know on the surface, as you look at this story, you kind of think it's curious. You're like, I couldn't just walk up to a cornfield and start eating corn, right off of the corn stalks.
Right.
But Jesus and his companions are actually doing what's lawful. Deuteronomy 23:25 instructs the Jewish farmers to leave the perimeter of their crop fields unharvested so that those that pass by are able to eat on their way through. And it's kind of a really cool little law that's given in the Old Testament to make you be thinking about your neighbor and thinking about someone you don't even know, to be, generous and hospitable to them. And so that part of the story is not odd at all. It was a very common thing to do. And just because we don't live in a culture like that too, I like to break down even as far as like what they were doing. If you pick up wheat in a grain field, like you can't just like pick it up and like yank off of it and start chewing. What you would do is you'd take it and you'd put it in the palm of your hand and kind of rub it together, and then you would pick out the grain pieces. And so, I mean, there was a little bit of like, I wouldn't even call it work, but there was something you had to do. No different than when I eat sunflower seeds. I pop sunflower seeds in. You got to chew a little bit to get to the seed and spit it out. That's what it took for them to be able to eat this. But the context, like you said, is so important. The Pharisees have consistently been challenging Jesus up until this point. And especially when we get into chapter 3, I think this is one of the worst chapter breaks known to man between Mark 2 and Mark 3, because by the time we get to chapter 3, they're really going to be irritated with Jesus because of all the things they're accusing him of. They've definitely been more about traditions, right? Like in chapter 2, they're really upset with him about not fasting the way that the Pharisees or the disciples of John did. And Jesus will talk to them about that. And then on this one, though, it really feels like it's something that they can get him on. Like everyone knows you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath day. Everyone knows that. And so if Jesus is clearly breaking that law and breaking that commandment, then surely we can get him. And watching the way Jesus handled these situations, I believe is just really fascinating. And so the context of it's really cool.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, the more I study Jesus, one of the things that impresses me more and more is the way he responds to criticism, the way he responds to questions that are meant to be gotcha questions. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think this is a really remarkable section of scripture in the way Jesus handles himself. So they're not stealing grain. That's not the issue. But they're claiming that he is working. Jason, let me ask you, what defines work on the Sabbath day? How do you define that? Because you look at the old law, what does the law say about it?
Yeah, so you're not supposed to take a sickle, to your fields. You're not supposed to be plowing. You're not supposed to be doing those kinds of things. And as far as the law goes, it's not all that specific. I mean, work is one of those things that like it when you see it. But the Pharisees have a completely different view of work. You see, the Pharisees, kind of like we do today with the New Testament, they get nervous when maybe something in the Bible doesn't spell it out exactly like you want it to. And so what you'll do to be on the super safe side is maybe you'll come up with a rule for yourself. Well, I know the line is here, and just so that I can stay as far away from the line as possible, I'm going to draw this line here. But before you realize it, before you know it, if you're not careful, what you end up doing is you start making this line the law, when this is the law. A line is good if you draw for yourself, if it keeps you away from the law, but you can't make it law. And Jesus will go to toe to toe with them about that in chapter 7. But with the Sabbath day specifically, they had come up with all kinds of different rules. And like, there were some silly things, like if you needed a cup of flour or something like that, and you needed to go over to your neighbor and ask for a cup of flour, they were allowed to take it and pour it into your hand or something like that, but you weren't allowed to like take it out of their hand, and they had like all these really silly rules. This is in the Mishnah and Talmud, some of those Jewish tradition books, to like try and stay away from the line. But what they end up doing is judging other people based off of their own lines that they've drawn or the traditions that they're following. And that's what's happening with Jesus here.
Yeah, you said it. There's all kinds of, it's just crazy. Like, I think a woman wasn't allowed to pluck a gray hair. Like, she wasn't allowed to look in the mirror out of fear that she would pluck a gray hair, and that would be considered work somehow. And like, there's all kinds of things in the Mishnah that, and like you said, it's a line. Maybe it had good purpose. Maybe there was good purpose for which when they started it, and it's okay to have personal standards and draw lines, but they, like you said, they kind of got the fence confused with the building. They got their laws confused with the law itself. And actually, you said Mark 7, he'll really challenge them about that.
Yes, exactly. And so Jesus, it's interesting, as we've pointed out in verse 24, the Pharisees will say about Jesus, they're doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath. And that on the surface is already just not true. Like,
right.
There's nothing that says they're breaking the law here. But Jesus will still answer them, and he answers them in a really interesting way. And this is a passage that people debate about sometimes. To me, I think it's pretty cut and dry with what Jesus is trying to do. Jesus, he brings David into it. And he brings up a story of David that, like, the Pharisees would have known, but I don't think it was one they like to talk about a whole lot. When we think about David, I think even we ourselves are tempted to think about, like David and Goliath, for instance, and him and his mighty triumph over Goliath. Or, we want to think about all the different Psalms he wrote and all the great things he did there. But with David in this situation, it's a David that was clearly in the wrong. And when you go back to 1 Samuel, the 20th chapter, and you read this story that is about David, it's a real low point in David's life. It's a time where he is on the run from Saul, and he's lying, he's deceiving people, and he actually gets to the temple, and he is ready to, I think we lost Curtis, so we'll get Curtis back here in a second, and we'll keep going. But he gets over here to the temple, and he's really, really hungry. He's got some people with him, and he goes into the temple, and it's the day that they are going to change over the showbread, or the consecrated bread, that my translation says. And we actually know that they changed over that bread on the Sabbath day. So it's really cool how Jesus like picks an example of something that happened on the Sabbath day. And David will go up and he'll say, I need this bread. This is my bread. I need it. I need to eat it so that we can live. And the priests are really caught off guard by this. And only the priests are able to eat this. And what ends up happening is David talks them into giving it to him. Him and his companions eat it, and had lied about his pretenses of being there, said that the king had sent him on a mission. And David goes from that place, and he ends up getting in another hard spot where he has to like act like a crazy person with beard or with saliva and drool running down his beard to get out of the situation. And so it's like a real low moment in David's life. And on the surface, you're like, why would Jesus bring this into it? Like, why would he talk about this? And some people have looked at this and said, well, Jesus is just saying like, it's like an ethical thing. Like, you can steal bread for your family if you're in a dire situation. And because Jesus is doing what's not lawful on the Sabbath, he can break it. Well, I don't think that's at all what's going on, because in the context of Mark 3 or Mark 2, we've already made the case, Jesus wasn't even doing what was wrong. And in 1 Samuel 20, David is clearly doing what's wrong. What I believe Jesus is doing is simply showing hypocrisy on their parts. The way that they will look up to David, excuse any behavior he had, even in moments where he was clearly in the wrong, and yet with Jesus, when he's in the right, here they are accusing him. And he picks an example that serves two purposes. One, as I had mentioned, the showbread was changed over on the Sabbath day, so there's the comparison there. But secondly, he brings Abiathar into it. And when you go back and you read that story in 1 Samuel 20, one of the things you'll actually learn is that the high priest was actually Ahimelech and not Abiathar. And some have ran to Mark 2 to say, see, the Bible translations get mixed up, and like the Bible's unreliable. They don't even know who the high priest was. But I think what Jesus said was very intentional, and I think he did it on purpose. Because Abiathar was the son of Ahimelech. And Abiathar would have been a trigger name for the Jewish people of another story that's not mentioned here. And it happens after David runs away from the temple. He runs away from Israel, and he ends up getting all of the priests slain in that temple because they harbored him. And Saul will end up having all of them killed, except for one, and that was Abiathar, the high priest. And so I think it's possible Jesus chose to use Abiathar's name, because it is in the days of Abiathar anyways, as a further nudge to them to say, David not only lied that day and did these horrible things, his sin also led to the slaughter of multiple high priests. And yet you guys are regarding him as this great king. Yeah, go ahead, Curtis.
I think that's a great point. I think that's exactly right. Hypocrisy. And here they are saying Jesus is doing something wrong, breaking the Sabbath, so doing something unlawful. And yet David clearly did something unlawful, and yet they justified what he did. And they're certainly not going to do that for Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. And so in verse 27, Jesus will say, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. And I love that, because he's trying to get them to realize what the Sabbath was originally for. And there's kind of one big thing that people know about the Sabbath day, as we've already talked about, is that you're not supposed to work. And that's a blessing. Like, Curtis, I don't know if you take like a set day off every week. I in general get to take Mondays off. I'm thankful I get to do that. But I do that. I look forward to it. Like, oh, that's my day off. I don't have to work, and I get some relaxation with my family. It's a blessing, and I'm thankful for that. And that's how they should have felt for the Sabbath day. But there was actually something else that the Old Testament commanded that they do on the Sabbath day. Not only they were not supposed to work, but they were supposed to reflect and think about the fact that they were slaves in Egypt. So you have a day where you don't work, and you just get to sit there and think about, man, like, we used to be slaves, but now we're sitting in our own houses. that we didn't build, that we're already here, and we have our own farms and we have all of this great stuff. Does that sound like a pretty good day to you? Like that sounds like a great day to me.
Yeah.
But Jesus is saying, you guys have turned it into a curse. Oh, well, I can't work. I can't do this. I can't do that. Jesus says you had it all wrong. And there's an application there for us, because how many of God's commandments do we do that with? We see them as a burden. And 1 John 5 says God's commandments are not burdensome. That's
Amen.
not how the Lord works. So we need to be appreciative of the commandments that God gives and realize that they're made for our good.
I was thinking about that too. You think about hard work. That was one of the curses of sin. There was work before, but the laborious work was part of the curse. So they were going to get a break from that curse.
Yeah,
what a blessing.
Exactly. Yeah, amen. Yeah. And so Jesus, he does do something. I think he brings in his authority in verse 28. Yeah. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. I do think this is him saying, like, I made the Sabbath day. Like, I am the Sabbath day. Sabbath is rest. Jesus is bringing ultimate rest. And so there's some double, play going on with that as well.
Yeah.
But there is an authority that Jesus carries with himself that he's already talked about earlier in Mark that kind of resurfaces here.
Kind of connects over to Hebrews 4, talking about Jesus being our rest.
Amen. Exactly.
The ultimate rest. Yeah.
Yep. So that's my thoughts there through 28. But the context, it bleeds right over in chapter 3.
Yeah. So I'll read that.
Sure.
Are we just reading? We're reading to verse 6, right?
Yeah, just do verse 6 is cool.
Okay. And he entered the synagogue again, and a man was there who had a withered hand. And so they watched him closely, whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, and so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, "Step forward." And he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life, or to kill?" But they kept silent. And when he had looked around at them with anger, being grieved by the hardness of their hearts, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored as whole as the other. Then the Pharisees went out and immediately plotted with the Herodians against him, how that they might destroy him.
So Jesus goes into the synagogue, the gathering place for the Jewish people, and it's on the Sabbath day. Like, that was another thing that they did on the Sabbath day. We saw that back in chapter 1, because after they go to synagogue, they go to Peter's mother-in-law's house. And there's a guy there with a withered hand. Curtis, have you ever met someone like that before? Oh, I think we lost Curtis. I actually had a friend in high school who had a withered hand like that, and a super cool guy. And he's the guy that I think about every time I come to this passage. But especially back then, like, having a withered hand would have been a really hard thing, because, you need to work. You need to be able to provide. And if you've got a withered hand, it would be difficult to provide and do physical labor and, stuff like that. And it would have been hard. Well, they're watching Jesus. And if you saw everything that we've seen in chapter 1 and chapter 2, like, Curtis, let's just together list off some of the things we've seen Jesus do. In Mark 1, he's able to cast out demons, right? Yeah. He's able to heal sick people. He like cleanses that leper. And then in chapter 2, like, he makes a paralytic get up and walk.
Yeah.
So if you and I were watching Jesus in the synagogue, I would hope we'd be hoping, like, hey, like, there's Jesus. There's, whatever the guy's name is. I hope he does something about that. But that's not how they're watching Jesus here. They're watching to see if he'll heal them on the Sabbath day, so that they might accuse him. Yeah. So you're starting to see the hardness of the Pharisees' heart, and it will come to a head later in chapter 3, where they'll say, "Jesus, you're just casting out demons because you are a demon, or you're the ruler of the demons." And it's like, Jesus' first thing he'll say is, that doesn't even make any sense. But he'll end up saying, those that blaspheme against the Holy Spirit have committed an unforgivable sin. And his point is, as long as your view of God is that he's from the devil, you'll never have forgiveness. Like there's nothing Jesus is going to be able to do. And chapter 3 is kind of helping build to that. And this is one of those places we see that. And so if you're Jesus, like he knows what's going on and he knows what's in their hearts, it says. So he tells the guy, like, hey, get up and come over here.
Well, could you imagine like anxiously waiting for him to heal somebody so that you could accuse him of something? Like that blows my mind. I can't even imagine somebody healing somebody, let alone then having the hardness of heart to say, okay, I hope he does this so that I can make some kind of accusation against this man.
Yeah, exactly.
That's crazy.
Yeah, right. And Jesus recognizes that. And I think he's trying to expose to the people in the synagogue just how wicked these people are. And Jesus does it in a way I think is kind of funny. Like, I think he's being openly, not facetious, but just trying to expose this.
Yeah.
And he'll ask a very, very rhetorical, what should be rhetorical question in verse 4. Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save a life or to kill? You know, they've been all about telling him what the law says. Law says this. Law says not to do this, you know. And now I kind of like to think he's looking over at one of the Pharisees who's got his books in his hand, you know, or the scrolls in his hand. He's like, hey, look it up for me. Am I supposed to like kill someone today, or am I supposed to do something good? And it's like anyone should be able to answer that and be like, well, of those two options, like you should do good all the time. And I guess especially on the Sabbath day. And if you can save a life, you should. And if I'm not mistaken, Curtis, if you've not heard this, you can fact check me. But doesn't the Mishnah, didn't they have like a rule like they wouldn't help a Gentile person if they were dying on the Sabbath day or something like that?
Something like that. I think so.
Yeah.
I think you're probably.
Or maybe even it was like there was something
just a
with
general.
like a donkey or something falling in a ditch, and if it was a Gentile's, like hands off, like you don't help. But if it's a Jewish person, you help. You know, so I don't know.
Well, there was always that debate as to whether what you would do on the Sabbath, which one's more important, the Sabbath day or helping your neighbor whose donkey fell into the ditch. Or
right.
So I mean, they always had that debate, which one was more important.
Yeah, exactly. So they won't answer this question Jesus asks. And the text says he was angry about that. It makes some people uncomfortable. But like, I hope you get angry just envisioning being there. Like, what do you mean? Like, you don't want this guy to be healed? And like, you can't just answer an obvious question that it's better to do good and to save life on the Sabbath day? And he's not only angry though, he's grieved at the hardness of their hearts. And I know it's not the same exact language, but it does make me think about the days of Noah, where everyone, you know, was doing what was right in their own eyes, and it was exceedingly wicked, and God was angry about that. But it also says he was sorry that he had made man. He was grieved about that. And you see a similar hardness of heart here, but out of God's own people. And Jesus will say, stretch out your hand. And in other places, Jesus will, like, at one point with a blind guy, like, spit on the ground and make mud and, like, put it on his eyes. With a deaf guy in chapter 7 of Mark, he'll, like, look up to heaven and, like, use his saliva again and touch his tongue. And, like, Jesus is often, like, very, like, hands-on with miracles. This time, it's really interesting. Jesus doesn't do that. He just says it. And I think there's something to that, because he's not even working. Like, he doesn't touch the guy. He doesn't, like, pour anything on him. Like, he's just speaking because his power is incredible. And the guy's hand is immediately restored. And you would expect a good response from this, but that's not what you get.
I don't think anybody would argue that it's wrong to say or to instruct somebody to stretch out your hand. Like he didn't do anything. Here they are waiting for him to be the hands-on, like spit and touch him or something. They're waiting for something, but he doesn't give him anything.
Yeah.
And he still heals the man.
And their response is sad in verse 6.
Yeah.
They immediately go out and conspire on how they might destroy or kill him. The Pharisees and the Herodians do. And of course, Pharisees and Herodians hated each other, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah.
But in that, they really, Curtis, they answered Jesus's question.
Yeah.
It's still the Sabbath day. Is it better to do good or to do evil? To save a life or to kill? And then on the Sabbath day, what do they go out and do?
Plot to how to kill him.
Plot on how to kill him. Yeah. So it really is amazing to me, just the hypocrisy of the Pharisees and the Herodians. And so these stories and seeing how Jesus deals with them is some of my favorites.
I often wonder if starting a coup on the Sabbath day would have been something in their books. I mean, here they are gathered together, plotting and talking about what they're going to do to him.
Right. Yep.
Jesus didn't break the Sabbath, but I think they probably did.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's what I got on that.
Man, I appreciate you taking the time and studying with me, and sorry about the connection. I don't know. I'm at the building. I guess the internet's not doing very good today, but
no worries at all.
Well, so glad everybody was able to join us. Next Friday, we'll join together again, and we'll pick another passage. So be looking for the time and the passage, but appreciate Chase. Glad he was able to come, and until next time.
Yep. Sounds good.